As we start 2024, there are a couple of very interesting hardware launches for console-focused gamers. Of course, we have the PlayStation 5 Pro, where we're expecting some news later on in the year. The PS5 Pro, I've spoken a lot about the specifications of the machine, but ultimately it's going to be the best way that PlayStation gamers have to play, well, PlayStation games. This is going to be particularly of interest for those of us who have very high-end 4K 120Hz screens, or if you regularly play on, let's say, the PSVR 2, it's going to basically be the ultimate way to play, and of course we're going to expect higher resolutions, generally more stable, high frame rates, and perhaps better ray tracing and all of the other usual visual flares that you would expect from the console, plus maybe some other bonus stuff which I suspect will be pretty cool. With that said, the focus of this video, of course, will be the next generation of Switch, which throughout this video I'm going to refer to as the Switch 2. The original Switch hardware is now starting to look pretty long in the tooth. Some games, for example, both Zeldas, really show what you can do when you artistically create a title for limited hardware, and I think you would agree that the games just look really nice. Plus other titles like Metroid Dread and Mario's, etc, etc, they really do look pretty interesting and very cool. There have been also a number of ports which quite frankly have pushed the machine and really worked miracles, for example Doom. With that said, the limitations of the hardware are now becoming pretty painfully obvious, particularly if you are one of those folks who are running a high-resolution screen, for example 4K. You can really start to see that the hardware just simply cannot keep up. So of course, the next generation of hardware is now being spoken about a lot, and there have been a couple of intriguing leaks online. Now, Nvidia themselves actually kind of leaked, or should I say they were hacked, and therefore a leak kind of popped up, that the next generation of console from the company would be, well, at least being powered by the company, as obviously Nintendo will again be leveraging the Nvidia-based architectures, and in this case they're going to be using T239. Myself, I've leaked that, plus some others online have also spoken about this quite extensively, including Coppertite7 Kimmy, who's had a really good track record. But interestingly anyway, with the documents which have leaked again from Nvidia themselves, it references that of course this next generation of hardware would feature things like DLSS, which simply the original console could not support. With that said, there is a very intriguing leak which has recently emerged from a Taiwanese website by the name of UDN. Again, they state that Nvidia's T239 would be used. There would be 8GB of RAM, 64GB of storage, a quote greatly improved battery life, 120Hz screen refresh, and the price target is around $400 US. Now on the face of it, if we look at these specifications, they line up quite well to previous leaks. 120Hz is nice, and I suspect some games like 2D platformers, the Metroidvanias and that type of stuff, 120Hz is going to be really nice because obviously, it just is going to just feel, well, just less laggy, I suppose is the best way of putting it. But now 64GB of storage for the console isn't exactly great. I suspect that this is going to be user upgradable, but honestly the leaks don't really mention that here. Now, one of my sources, who's actually been pretty accurate in the past, did actually provide some updated information regarding this. Now, you can see it on screen yourself. I'll go over it real quick, but you can pause, of course, the video for a more detailed look. So there are 8 Cortex A7 8AE CPU cores. One of these are reserved for the OS. 10 SMs based on the Ampere architecture. It seems to be some type of hybrid design, but it's 1.4 to 2 T-flops. Now, of course, the reason there's variability here is that it can run in both handheld as well as docked mode. The manufacturing process is Samsung's 8LPE, no surprises there. 8 gigs of RAM, again, other leaks said that. It's running between 5500 and 6400 MTS, with 1 GB of that reserved. Again, the variance in clock frequency, as you probably can guess, is based upon, that's right, whether it's docked or not, a 7-inch 720p OLED 120Hz screen, 64GB of eMMC, DLSS 2 and FSR 3 support, roughly it's on par with the PS4 when docked visually. Now, of course, when we're talking about visuals, it's not exactly one-to-one. There are certainly going to be some strengths that the PS4 has that this doesn't, etc., etc. But we're talking a rough analogy here. Switch design is similar to the OLED one, and apparently it's got full backwards compatibility with the games and accessories. However, this does not mean, of course, that the Switch original hardware can run these games. Now, interestingly, my source also did tell me that it's possible there could be some type of Pro model released in the future. I really would not put a huge amount of faith in this happening, because Nintendo cancels things all of the time, but allegedly the rumor is that it's still based on the same chipset pretty much. The main difference is that it potentially has more memory, 12 gigabytes is the figure that I heard, as well as 12 SMs. Now that would essentially be the full T239 enabled, because this is basically cutting down some of the specifications of the chip, which I'm assuming is for yields as well as power consumption purposes, etc., etc. Now, ultimately, there are a lot of questions, of course, like what about DLSS 3 as well as ray tracing? Well, an early rumor was that we would indeed see DLSS 3 support enabled on this console, and there were some little bits of evidence to say that this could well be the case. And other rumors, you know, from a lot of folks were saying that this console would be capable of some type of frame generation. But now I'm being told that this may not happen. Basically speaking, it seems that potentially it just is not enough resources on board to make it, let's just say, frame generation seamless. However, DLSS 2 is still going to be supported, as well as FSR 3. So there are still a lot of options for developers. It'll still be interesting whether DLSS 3 support does make it to the final production console. Again, at this point, it doesn't seem like it will, but hopefully it does. What about ray tracing? Well, again, technically the hardware itself is capable of it. However, it seems like games just may not use it. And the reason is very similar to DLSS 3. Basically speaking, it would just outright cripple games to really use this, especially in handheld mode. Now in docked mode, maybe you could start seeing some light ray traced uses, but even then, I wouldn't hold my breath. So we'll wait and see on that one. I personally don't really expect games to be exactly pushing this. Ultimately, this is a handheld system that is being mass-produced for a pretty cheap price, and it is Nintendo at the end of the day. The console itself, the Switch, the original Switch, I mean, obviously, has sold ridiculously well for the company. I don't need to tell you guys that. It's sold just insanely well, and this is with very modest hardware specifications, but outside of that, one of the real positives of the system is that it's got a really good attach rate. Now, for those who aren't familiar, basically attach rate is the number of games which users on average will pick up for the system. For example, let's say there's a 40% attachment rate for Mario Kart 8, just for example. That means that 40% of Switch users essentially have bought Mario Kart 8. So, yeah, I mean, that's obviously not the be-all and end-all in metrics in terms of profitability and success of a system, because obviously there are a lot of different games across the system, and some of them may have like really cheap sale prices, etc., etc., etc. And of course, it doesn't also really take into account the used market, but then again, the used market, Nintendo doesn't really get anything anyway. But ultimately speaking, I do think that the console has been a runaway success for the company. So I'm not really surprised that Nintendo haven't just gone, crazy power, levels of console like they tried to compete in like their N64 days, or even the GameCube era. Like the GameCube era was probably the last time Nintendo really released a system that was very competitive. Like the GameCube was like, I'm not saying the Xbox was bad, or the PlayStation 2, or the Dreamcast. It's a very interesting generation, and I'd highly recommend, if you guys are like geeks, or just, kind of got a bit of time to kill, like you go into the toilet or something like that, it's really interesting to read the different approaches that each of the console vendors at the time took. with that generation, because like the Xbox, the GameCube, just those two consoles alone are so different in their approaches, and they've both got their own strengths and weaknesses. It's really cool stuff to read. But that generation, the GameCube was a technical marvel. Honestly, it was so powerful for the size of the actual hardware. It was a really cool little system. And if you go back and look at some of the titles on the GameCube, outside the fact that they've kind of, rendering a lower resolution and that stuff, it really did look absolutely beautiful. I still think a lot of games across that generation, even on the PS2, like if you were to look at like some of the God of War games, Shadow of the Colossus, hell, even old games like launch games like Devil May Cry 1 and Tekken Tag, they look really pretty. That's just my opinion. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. But anyway, yeah, I'm not surprised that Nintendo didn't just, I'm not surprised they didn't just go absolutely crazy and release a super high-end system. They're not trying to compete with the PlayStation, 5 or whatever. They're not trying to compete with the next generation Xbox. They are ultimately kind of doing their own thing, and it's being very successful for them. That said, guys, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. If you did, you know what to do. It's YouTube. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.